Let's take it into some offseason grades for the Cowboys. We'll kind of look at their needs as they were entering the offseason and what they did to address that. We'll start on the offensive side of the ball. The big need there was that offensive guard, number 4 overall, number 1 on offense, because Jonathan Cooper was a free agent. The Cowboys had to go find a way to get more help at the offensive guard spot. And early on, they didn't make a whole lot of moves there. They did re-sign Joe Looney to be a backup, but they lost Cooper to the 49ers, and they also signed Marcus Martin, who will compete for a role with Joe Looney. But then in the draft, in the second round, they found their man. Connor Williams comes over and solidifies the left guard need for the Cowboys. Not left tackle, Mr. Dallas Morning News writer. Williams will be your starter at left guard. Was one of my favorite picks in the entire NFL draft. And yeah, my favorite pick for the Dallas Cowboys. I like what he brings to the team. I'm excited. The Cowboys should once again have one of, if not the best offensive lines in the NFL. The receiver position was a big question mark because as the roster stood, it was a need, but it wasn't the peak need. There were concerns about Dez Bryant. Bryce Butler was a free agent. T-Will had been at this point, but he was not going to be cut because of his contract. The Cowboys made quite a few moves at the position. They cut Dez Bryant. They said bye to Bryce Butler. They cut Ryan Switzer, and they cut a guy named Brian Brown. Then the guys they brought in, they added Allen Hurns, they signed Deontay Thompson, and they drafted Michael Gallup and Cedric Wilson. The big loss there, of course, was Dez Bryant. And I know a lot of Cowboys fans were down on Dez because of the drops, because of everything. But he was their best receiver, both on paper and on the field. It was a big blow. So the guys the Cowboys are counting on this year, Allen Hurns, who has shown some flashes, but he's not a number 1. He's not the same caliber of player that Dez Bryant is. Now, he could get some more work and could produce better numbers if the Cowboys' offense overall is better, but he's just not the same player that Dez was for Dallas. And then their draft pick, their early one, was Michael Gallup out of Colorado State. I like the pick. I would have invited him in round 2. It was good value there. His immediate focus, though, is not to be the number 1 wide receiver, but to beat out Terrence Williams as the number 2. Then kind of one of the other big notable needs for the Cowboys. Again, we mentioned guard, but tackle was also kind of one because we didn't know what they were going to do with La'el Collins. And we know that Byron Bell and Chaz Green were awful. The big thing the Cowboys needed was a swing tackle, and they got that as well. And Cameron Fleming, that was the big addition. Of course, they kept Collins at right tackle, so that kind of solidified that need there. Fleming will be that swing tackle for Dallas. If Collins struggles or if Tyron Smith gets hurt, that's where you'll see Fleming play. But getting Fleming on a very cheap deal was a shrewd addition by the Dallas Cowboys. Then there was the backfield, and Elliott, of course, was the focal point. Alfred Morris was a free agent. The Cowboys are going to keep Rod Smith, but they still wanted a third down type back to kind of play that Lance Dunbar role, and they managed to find it. Now, they ended up kind of swapping out fullbacks with the Raiders. Keith Smith left in free agency. Jameis Lawali comes in via a trade. They didn't re-sign Alfred Morris, but then they drafted Bo Scarborough, and they added Tavon Austin. So they kind of got 4 guys, or maybe 3.5 with Austin, who we will continue to list as a running back, even though I expect to see more passing work in that Lance Dunbar type role. Austin will be what the Cowboys desperately wanted Ryan Switzer to be, even though that wasn't the case. And then there was the tight end position, and this was not a need going into the offseason, at least not a massive one, because Witten, although he was aging, was expected to return. Jeff Swaim was a decent backup. The hope was that Rico would get his shot. And then James Hanna retired, which wasn't a big surprise, at least in terms of getting him off the roster. Then Jason Witten retired, and they had to go bring in Dalton Schultz. So now tight end remains, I think, one of the bigger needs left for the Dallas Cowboys because they didn't take care of it. Receiver also, still a need for Dallas. And you cut Dez Bryant, you bring in Hurns and Thompson and Gallup and Ced Wilson, all compete for roles. But you don't actually have a true number 1 wide receiver. The unfortunate reality is you're not going to find one right now. We're too far into the offseason, barring a blockbuster trade, which Dallas will not do. You will not find a number 1 wide receiver. And then at tight end, you lose Hanna. You lose Witten. Hanna was not a big loss, but you lose one of the greatest tight ends of all time in the NFL and the greatest tight end in Cowboys history in Jason Witten, and you only bring in Dalton Schultz. The unfortunate reality is for the Cowboys that receiver and tight end, they were downgraded this offseason. Now, some will say it's addition by subtraction. I don't really think that's a thing. So, unfortunately, for the offense grade, I'm only giving it a C+ for the Cowboys this year. I love getting Connor Williams. That's fun. It's not necessarily a bad one to see, just kind of average in my mind. But with losing Dez, losing Witten, Schultz and Hurns and getting more playing time to Swaim or Jarwin or Rico, that's not going to be an upgrade. So a C+ for the Cowboys. The offense should be good next year, but especially compared to the 13-3 team, it's just not as good an offense, and I have some concerns about it because of the passing attack. But I do want to know from you guys, which offensive addition will have the biggest impact for the Cowboys? Give me a heart for Tavon, a like for Connor, a wow face for Hurns, a like face for Michael Gallup. I'm actually going to give the like here for Connor Williams, the round 2 pick, because of what it means for the Cowboys offense. They are going to run the ball every chance they get. They took the approach that, hey, we're going to have, an iffy passing attack. Let's make sure our running blocking offensive line is the best one in the NFL. Getting Seawill, I think, helps accomplish that. On to the defense then, and again, we'll take a look back at how things were at the beginning of the offseason. DeMarcus Lawrence was a free agent. That was the big thing there. You had to find a way to retain him, and they did. Now, they wanted some more depth as well, but they kept DeMarcus Lawrence. That was the big signing there. It wasn't a surprise there. They cut Benson Mayowa. They signed Coney. They drafted Dorrance Armstrong. Going to be a lot of competition at that defensive end spot, but keeping DeMarcus Lawrence was the #1 move by the Dallas Cowboys to keep him. They franchise tag him, so he's locked in for at least another year. We'll see how much longer DeMarcus Lawrence is with the Cowboys. I hope for a long time, especially if he plays just like he did last season. So Lawrence there was on the defensive end spot. Defensive tackle then was the next biggest need for the Cowboys, at least in my eyes, because he had nothing at nose guard. David Irving was a restricted free agent. So you wanted to keep David Irving, find a nose guard, right? Those are your 2 big check marks. Well, they kept David Irving. They re-signed him via tender. They re-signed backup nose guard Bryant Price. They added more depth in Jihad Ward. And it was a big deal keeping David Irving. In limited time last year, David Irving was incredible. They used the second-round tender to keep him. Going to count just under $3 million on the cap space next year. So keeping David Irving on the roster was a big move for the Dallas Cowboys. I love keeping him. That was the #1 move that they had to make outside of DeMarcus Lawrence on that defensive line. But the reason it's not a full need, and we'll get to this later as well, no nose guard. That's a big concern for me. And again, the front 7 was a big focal point for Dallas this offseason. Anthony Hitchens played a key role for them. He was a free agent. Concerned with the health of Sean Lee and Jalen Smith. The depth guys, Durant and Wilbur, were all free agents, and there were quite a few moves at linebacker. Hitchens leaves, Wilbur leaves, Justin Durant remains unsigned. Joe Thomas comes in. They bring in Covington out of Indiana in the 6th round, and they brought in Van Der Esch in the 1st round. We'll start with the loss of Anthony Hitchens, and that was a tough one because he's a good player. He's not 5 years, $45 million good, so I am okay with him leaving in free agency. That was way too much money in my eyes. Drafting Leighton Van Der Esch, a move that's been controversial, I know. He has the upside to be a great player, though, especially in terms of athleticism at the linebacker spot. Cowboys view him as a Mike, a middle linebacker. Hopefully he pans out, but now you got a good top 3 of Van Der Esch, Smith, and Lee, especially if all 3 are healthy. The other big need for me was at safety, and the Cowboys didn't really know how to use Byron Jones. I don't think Jeff Heath is an ideal starter. They played Xavier Woods out of position. An impact safety would have been ideal. That did not happen, and safety still remains unfulfilled because all they did was move Byron Jones to cornerback, I guess kind of made Xavier Woods into a true free safety, and signed some depth guys in Jason Thompson and Marquise Nuff, who I don't think are going to make the active roster. And then at cornerback was a much lesser need, but it was worth mentioning. Chidobe Awuzie, Jordan Lewis all come back. Anthony Brown comes back. Skandrick was a likely goner, so it was no surprise when the Cowboys cut him. Kind of painful to see him go to the Washington Redskins, though. Ben Wickery, not a big loss either. The addition was adding Byron Jones. Once that happened, the Cowboys were not going to spend a high-volume position or capital on a cornerback. So the only 2 big areas that give me pause right now for the Cowboys defense right now, #1 is at defensive tackle. They tried to go get Terrell McClain. They couldn't make it happen. They still do not have a reliable 1 technique. Malik Collins is hurt, and he plays out of position anyway. He's a 3 technique, playing the 1 technique role. My biggest fear for the Cowboys defense, outside of a lack of turnovers this offseason, or this season, is the Cowboys will not be able to stop the run because the defensive tackles of Irving, Collins, and so on aren't going to be good enough against the run because they're 280 pounds going up against 300-pounders that are great run maulers. That's my big concern for Dallas. It's stopping the run. And then, of course, the secondary need there is its safety. I like Heath, Woods, and Frazier. I think they're all #2s or #3s. Cowboys don't have that impact, true dynamic free safety type like in Earl Thomas, as you guys like to mention, but I don't think that move is going to happen right now. So I want to know from you guys, what is the biggest need left for the Cowboys? Give me a heart for wide receiver, a like for tight end, a wow for a safety, and a laughing face for DT. Even though defensive tackle is my biggest need left, I still like what the Cowboys did this offseason on the defensive side of the ball. You look at what they lost versus what they gained. Keeping DeMarcus Lawrence is a plus. That is a good thing in my, same with David Irving. Yes, you lost Anthony Hitchens. You brought in Leighton Vander Esch. I think, especially maybe in a couple years, that's not going to be a big drop-off at all. And I think if Jalen Smith improves, you're going to be fine at linebacker. I didn't have an issue cutting Skandrick. I want to see Lewis, Awuzie, Jones, Brown all get more reps anyway. The only reason it's not an A, they didn't find that defensive tackle spot, and I am a little bit concerned about the safety position overall. But in total for me, look, it wasn't a bad offseason for the Cowboys. I thought it was a good, but not a great offseason. I give it a B. Some areas I would have done things differently. I don't like losing Dez and Witten. That's what kind of takes it down. I don't like not getting a defensive tackle, but overall, it's a fine offseason for the Cowboys. I like Connor Williams. I like Hurns. I think there's some upside there with Vander Esch. I like kind of bringing in competition at defensive end and at wide receiver. It's just not quite a perfect offseason. That's why it's not an A for me. But let me know, guys, what grade do you give the Cowboys offseason? Give me a heart for an A, a like for a B, a wow face for a C, and a laughy face for a D or an F, or I guess an angry face if you're just really, really mad about the Cowboys offseason. And then one more quick note before we sign off for the day. Get your questions in the comments for another upcoming mailbag. You guys seem to like that, and I like doing those as well. So get your comments in there. We'll bring them up on a future show. Till then.